Okay, welcome. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Nick Barraclough back to the Mill Road History Society. Nick is a radio producer. He's done BBC documentaries. He's a musician. He's also a local lad, born and bred, which makes him special. And he's one of the pillars of the Flying Pig on Hills Road. And he's written a brilliant book about it called A Disorderly House, which got great illustrations. I thoroughly recommend you getting a copy. And more than that, during the first lockdown, I just want to say that every Sunday for weeks and weeks, Nick stood outside his house and played wonderful music. Local youngsters would stand up and sing to his music and Martin Kemp. And it was such an element of cheer to the local community, that Sunday spot. And he's going to bring us great cheer tonight, I'm sure. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Sophie, very much. The book, here's the book. It's called A Disorderly House. It's about the Flying Pig. And illustrated, by the way, that front cover was illustrated by John Halder, who is a wonderful Cambridge artist who did the first 30 years of the Folk Festival posters and did that for us. I wrote it because I heard about the fate of the Flying Pig. I heard that they were thinking about knocking it down, to demolish it. And I thought, that's absurd. I imagined there being a planning meeting at the council where they sit and they say, right, Flying Pig, what are we going to do? Want to knock it down? And half of them, they're half and half, and they're saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Just in case somebody said, actually, do you know what? They've written a book about it. And everybody goes, oh yeah, written a book, so we can't knock it down. So I thought that was worth writing a book for. Let me just turn my phone off. So I set about writing it with the help of some wonderful researchers. And a few things were unearthed that took me rather by surprise. It was a joy to write. It sold hundreds. We sold hundreds of them. Still some left, but bafflingly, hundreds are gone. The money, by the way, goes to cancer research for it, but it was a joy to do. And I'm going to just use some bits from the book, and there are reasons why I use these bits. And Mill Road comes into the story. And there's a lot about me, of course. Thomas Richardson's the first bloke that I want to tell you about. He was born in Pontypool in 1834. And when he was a teenager, moved to Bury St Edmunds with his family, and then came to Cambridge via Great Wilbraham, coincidentally, because we lived there for 15 years before we moved back into Cambridge. And he married a Harriet Fab, and there are Fabs still roaming in Great Wilbraham. The two of them got married at St Paul's in 1858. His employment at the time was a cattle drover, so he was a cowboy from South Wales. And the two of them took over the Crown Pub. The pub had been built in 1845. It was called the Engineer then, and it was built for railway workers mainly, to cater for the new railway that had just come. The station had been built down the end of a track in a field, an end of a track off Hills Road, which of course was Station Road. I've got a picture here in the book that shows where I cleverer, I'd have done a PowerPoint thing, but I'm not. But here, if you see, there where the black cow is where the Flying Pig, there should be a pig there, but the Flying Pig is now where that black cow is there. The kink in the road is still there. Hills Road still has that kink. And the buildings in the distance are Downing College. Because, of course, there was no development at that point between Downing College and we were in the country here. So, incidentally, that area, when it was built up, St Paul's Road and those other roads, when they were built, it was described by the university, it was referred to as New Zealand because they considered it so far away. They were egocentric even then, particularly then. Also on Station Road, on the corner of Station Road, and I remember this when I was a boy, was Ratty and Kett Building Company. They were carpentry, joiners, stonemasons and so on. And James Ratty had a house right on the corner, Poplar Cottage, pretty little Victorian cottage, right on the corner of Station Road. And going down Station Road on the right were the joinery works, which were really pretty timber-clad buildings. And then there was the stoneworks around the hills roadside. And they were a really attractive industry. This sounds a strange thing to say, but they were. George Kett, the partner, incidentally, was a descendant of Robert Kett, who led Kett's rebellion in Norfolk in 1549 and was eventually executed in Norwich Castle. And that sculpture on the end of Kett House, which is there now, that sculpture is of Kett's Oak in Norfolk, which is named after Robert Kett. And you can still see Kett holding court. And there's a woman there with a child on her lap you can make out in that sculpture that's still there. In the mid-50s, we spoke to someone who used to live there, whose parents ran the pub, who was a boy in the mid-50s. And he remembered people coming over the road from Ratty and Kett's and saying, you really need to know that tomorrow we're bulldozing the woodyard and it's full of rats. And he said the next day, they closed all the doors, closed all the windows and looked out from upstairs. The bulldozers moved in. And he said the road was black with rats. Hills Road was covered in them. His father was down the side, there were no doors to the yard, it was open. His father was there with a barrel full of water. He's picking them up and throwing them in and drowning them in this vat of water. In this book, by the way, a lot of people who frequent the Flying Pig are artists, not musicians, obviously, we'll come to that later, but artists, great artists. And they did illustrations for us that they just did it for nothing, these terrifically talented artists. And this was the artist's impression of the rats on Hills Road pub. It's a glorious, I mean, the illustrations are, and I can say this because I'm artistically tone deaf, they're absolutely stunning. The pictures in there. So that's a story from the Ratty and Kett. And of course, in 1961, they knocked down the Ratty and Kett buildings and they built the Kett House, horrible, square, ugly building. There seems to be something about Station Road that attracts unimaginative architects. We'll come to that later too. That plot that you saw with the black cow, where the pub was it was just an enclosure that was very important historically, because it was where across the road from it was the way station. The milestone is still there. It's exactly a mile from the city centre, and carts would come in and be weighed on the way into town and weighed on the way out so they could pay their duty. So because of that activity, there were two pubs. There was the Engineer, became known as the Crown, and next door to that, the Osborne Arms. There was also a market garden, an abattoir, and a brewery. So there's a lot going on that patch, which is the one the developers have their hands on. It's an important part of Cambridge's history. And incidentally, the Osborne Arms, that's a story. You might, it was an inauspicious pub. It wasn't a special pub, but it was older than the Crown. I would just say Engineer, Crown, Flying Pig, it's the same building. It was older than that pub. And the developers bought the site, and started applying to do things, didn't get anything through. But one bank holiday Monday morning, a good few years ago now, the bulldozers came again and bulldozed the Osborne Arms on a bank holiday Monday morning. People next door in the Flying Pig rang the council to say, do you know what's going on? And of course, there's nobody there. So they bulldozed it and they got away with it. Trouble is, actually, I've heard people planners talking about that since and saying, I'm not going to do that again. But, so, we ought to get back to the Richardsons who are running the place. Thomas Richardson in the census of 1881, living in the Crown with Thomas Richardson, his wife Harriet, their children Thomas, Matilda, Dorothy, Jessie, Joseph, Richard his brother, and about half a dozen lodgers. The place was packed. And Thomas Richardson was a sound fellow, but there were some who weren't, who ran that pub. A few years ago, before Thomas, it had been run by the Miss Bensons, and they were appalling. They came from Cambridge Place. Now you go into town, past Glisson Road, and then on your right, you barely know it's there now, little road, tiny little, you get one car down there, Cambridge Place. Nothing, there's a sort of architects down there or something now, lockups and things. Back then, it was a dreadful place. In Cambridge Place, there were brothels, breweries, and dreadful inns. And the Miss Bensons came from Cambridge Place and took over the Crown in 1850. And the police raided it one night while they were there and discovered 14 prostitutes in the bar. So this was a disorderly house in the extreme. Thomas, though, was better. He ran it much better. His name, though, did crop up in the paper. I only mentioned this cropping up because it's topical. Because on the 30th of January, 1875, the Cambridge Independent Press reported, Thomas Richardson of Hills Road was charged with neglecting to have his child, Jessie Sarah Richardson, vaccinated within the proper period. Mrs. Richardson stated that the child had been too delicate to be vaccinated, but produced no certificate. An order for vaccination within a month was issued. It was going on then too. And Thomas died in 1882, and it's just been fascinating getting into the life of an ordinary Cambridge pub at this time. From this story particularly, and I think this tells a lot. Harriet took over the pub. Thomas's wife took over the pub. And in the paper again, this time in September 1885, they discovered a body floating in the Cam. It turned out to be the presciently named Robert Doom from Ashford in Kent. He was found floating in the Cam. He'd been working on a road between Hills Road and Cherryington Road. We reckon it was probably Cavendish Avenue. The report went like this. Harriet Richardson, widow, keeping the Crown in Hills Road, said the deceased, whose body she had seen, lodged at her house, but she did not know his name. He came to see her last Tuesday week and told her he was working at the New Avenue. She first missed him on Saturday night. She sat up for him until 11:45. Thinking he'd stopped out, she went to bed. Afterwards, she spoke to people about him, and his mate came to her house and told her he would make inquiries of the police. Deceased did not get drunk while he was with her. He used to pay his lodgings every night. On the Saturday afternoon, he left between 3 and 4 o'clock. He said he was going to get a piece of meat for her to cook for him on the Sunday. He left no clothes with her. He seemed about the same as usual. When he left her, he did not seem excited or depressed. He had a little bundle, which he took away with him on Saturday morning. She supposed it was a shirt, and that he took it to be washed. She did not think he had a watch. People stole each other's clothes then. That was the thing they did. That was the thing most stole. And to have a watch was a big deal. Harriet's daughters kind of took over the pub for a bit, and she died then in 1900. Harriet did, and Thomas Jr. took over running the pub. And this is a sad story. He did a bit of moonlighting. The Suffolk Yeomanry, a kind of home guard, he would go and cook for, and that when they were encamped in Suffolk. And while he was out there, he had a heart attack and died. And this report in the Cambridge News said, the widow, upon hearing the sad news, became quite distracted. There is one little daughter who was a great pet of her father. The poor child has not yet been told of her father's death. Mrs. Richardson is keeping the shock from her daughter as long as possible. To use her own words, she said she was afraid to tell her because it would send her dear daughter out of her mind, as she was everything in the eyes of her dear father, who received a letter from his little girl only Friday last, stating how she was reckoning upon the day she would return home. So, the Richardsons ran the pub over the turn of that century. And the reason I'm telling you about the Richardsons is that Thomas Richardson Sr. and his wife Harriet are my great-great-grandparents. They begat Matilda, who married Thomas Connor, and they begat Edith, who married William Webb, a cabinet maker of Cavendish Road, and they begat Millicent, who married Stanley Barraclough and married me, and begat me. So that I didn't know. I was writing the book at the same time as my brother-in-law was researching my mother's family tree. And he said, you do know that your great, and had no idea at all. And I rather liked that. And while I was doing it, as I found out about the Richardsons, I was talking to my mother, who is to be 99 in a month or so, born and brought up on the Broadway and Mill Road. And I said to her, did you ever hear about the Richardsons? My mum, who couldn't remember what she did 5 minutes ago. I said, remember the Richardsons? And she said, oh, yes, remember them. Oh, Mum used to talk about them in their pub all the time. And it's just amazing, because when you write something, when you're writing about something historical, or that you know is true, but historical, you go into that world and you think of it like another world. And actually to speak to someone with a living memory of what you're writing about was quite special. So Edith married William Webb, my mother's parents, and they bought a shop on Mill Road in 1924. And Miss Tingy lived upstairs. She died the next year and they moved the family into the shop. The shop they had was on the Broadway. It's now the Cat charity shop next to the tattoo parlour. This shop had a room, if you go in there, there's a room behind, which they had as their sitting room, and a loo the end of the yard outside, and a tiny kitchen and 3 bedrooms. Doesn't sound too bad for a family until you realise there were 10 of them. There was my grandfather and grandmother and their 8 children. Edie, Jessie, Will, Bert, Kathleen, Doris, Nora and Millie. 10 children. Parents in 1 bedroom, 2 boys in the other bedroom, 6 girls in the 3rd bedroom. Granddad sold radios, accumulators, which he charged up in the cellar underneath. You go into that shop, there's a door right in front of you. You go in and the steps lead down into a cellar. And that's where he did accumulators. For people who didn't have mains electricity, they charged thumping great batteries that you'd take and get charged up and take away. And it was a toy shop. I had a grandfather with a toy shop. I didn't get 1 toy ever. Not one. Partly because I think 17 grandchildren, but partly because my grandfather was a miserable old sod. He wore a 3-piece suit every day. He had a gold watch and chain on it, and he was kind of king of that part of Mill Road, the Broadway area. He strode about that place. He was imperious, opinionated. Actually, he was a laugh, but he was terrible. I drove Mum down there a couple of years ago. She loved being driven down Mill Road. And we parked across the road and she looked at the shop and she said, oh, yeah, I can remember being there. And that 2 things, she said, being in the bedroom upstairs and looking over where we were parked, you know, the newer row of shops across the road from the Victorian side, the newer road of single story, 2-story building. That was all one house. There was one great big house with a long brick wall and grand gates. She said we used to look at, my sisters and I, we'd look out of the window and we could see the party, the garden parties. Oh, they look lovely, those people in there. We used to think, what must that be like to be in there with those people? Looking the other way, she's looking at the shop. And she was saying, yeah, we'd go to bed and Dad would go for his drink because he drank every night in the, I wondered where I got it from. He drank in the Constitutional Club or the Duke of Argyll down on Argyll Street. And every night, she said, he'd go out and then 5 minutes later, we'd hear Mum go downstairs and we'd hear the till go ting. And we knew she was taking out £1 or something because she never had enough money for the housekeeping. She was a poor, put upon thing, my grandmother, a little just a waif of a thing, just worn out by everything. But she remembered that. That grandfather of mine, he had the first radio set in Cambridge. That's appropriate. When I got into radio, and the first television, and people would come from miles around to stand on the pavement outside W.F. Webb and Sons to look at the television. You know, tiny little screen, little blue screen. During the war, when bombs were dropping around, they were told to tape up those large plate glass windows for the danger of breaking. They were told to tape them up, so he taped it up like a spider's web. It's quite ingenious. There are the pictures somewhere. So that's what was going on with my grandfather and the business. It was a very male-centric thing. I mean, he was the king. His two sons took over the business. The daughters just marry him off as fast as you can. Mum had seen a boy in Vicarage Terrace. She'd been seeing him for a while. But her parents didn't approve of him because Vicarage Terrace was very dodgy indeed. Vicarage Terrace, if you don't know, is parallel to Petworth Street. Get right up the end of Gwyder Street and keep going. It's up there. There are no houses in Vicarage Terrace now. But she went out with this boy for a while. She was told she couldn't carry on seeing him. They used to meet on the top of a Mill Road Bridge every now and again. And she was told to stop seeing him. And the first bomb that dropped on Cambridge in the war fell on his house and killed him and his father. And she never quite recovered from that. And we would still go and see, she would take us as children to see his mother, whom she visited until she died. In the meantime, my dad came to RAF Feltwell near in Norfolk, and he'd come into Cambridge to meet girls. And Mum would go into Cambridge to meet boys, and the place they went to, of course, was the Dorothy Ballroom. And they met there. He was an RAF chap with the moustache, warrant officer air gunner in Wellington bombers, and they saw each other for about 3 months, and he would telephone her. My grandparents couldn't believe when the phone rang it was for her, that it was a man actually wanting to talk to Millie. And they saw each other as often as they could, knowing that something could go wrong, because in Bomber Command, about half the people who crewed those planes didn't come back. And one day the phone didn't ring. And for some weeks, they had no idea what had happened to him. And then finally she got a letter from my father's mother in Yorkshire, because he's from Wombwell near Barnsley, to say he'd been captured and was in the prisoner of war camp. And he spent the rest of the war, 3.5 years, in a POW camp. I said at his funeral, nearly 20 years ago now, that when in I think December the 30th, 1940, he floated down in his parachute, watching the plane he was in going down in flames with the rest of the crew on board, except for one other who got out, but his parachute didn't open. He watched that go down, and as he floated down, being circled by the Messerschmitt that had shot the plane down, because they sometimes shot the parachutists as well. If he'd known, as he floated down with the parachute, if he'd known that his notices would read, died peacefully at home in his 80th year, he would have regarded that as quite a result.
Yeah.
Anyway, he got through the rest of the war with long stories about his POW days, which are quite fascinating. Came back, crash course in teaching, married mum straight away. She waited for him for 3.5 years. They got married straight away and bought a house in Marshall Road, Marshall Road. The luxury Marshall Road was. They had a bedroom for, they had 4 children, of course, which blew it a bit, but that went well because Grandad, in the meantime, had bought the shop across the road. The posh fish and chip shop. The posh fish and chip. He bought that double shop and sold washing machines and refrigerators and so on, white goods. So he had 2 shops. And if he'd known that would become a posh fish and chip shop, and if he'd have known there would be cafes spilling out onto the pavement, and if he'd have known there would be a Mill Road historical society, he'd have hooted the whole thing. Because Mill Road was a place to escape from. It really was. And they were on the wrong side of the bridge. And we called it that in my family. It was known as the wrong side of the bridge. When I told my mother I was buying a house, and she said, "Oh, where?" I said, "Cypress Road." She said, "Oh, well, it's a start, I suppose." That's how they felt about it. It's hysterical. It was a place to escape from. Just a bit about what happens in the ensuing years. Dad became a school teacher. He taught at the Brunswick, and then at Newnham Croft, and then was headmaster at St Andrews in Chesterton. His main thing in life was to get his 4 kids through the 11 plus, which he did. And then I went to the county, the Cambridgeshire High School for Boys, now Hills Road Sixth Form College. It was horrible. It was a terrible school. Absolutely dreadful. All right, I was hopeless. But I do remember the only thing I was passionate about was music. And my form master said, "Who wants to do music O-level?" I said, "I want to do it." And he said, "No, not you, Barraclough. Don't be daft. Look at your sciences and your, geography and history. They're all hopeless. You can't take another one on." So I got 3 O-levels and never learned how to read music and still can't. It's a shame. By the way, the Pink Floyd famously, Roger Barrett, Sid Barrett as became known, and Roger Waters were at the county. And The Wall, "We don't need education, no dark sarcasm in the classroom." I know exactly the teachers they were talking about. Absolutely right. Having said that, just got to say, I did rub shoulders with some really, really good blokes. There were the other boys there were terrific. And I did, there are a few things. I picked up a couple of things. But I did odd jobs. I was the assistant to the assistant to the assistant bursar at a college. I sold leather to shoe manufacturers. I sold furniture at Joshua Taylor Interiors. They had the most expensive furniture in the world, but I wasn't allowed to sit down. And we got 2 customers a day. It was a nightmare. Then I met a girl on a bus, and she had a guitar that I liked the look of. And I got into bands, and I played professionally for 10 years. That came to an end, and my sister rang me when I was just really down on my luck, repairing bicycles and living off eggs a friend of mine was giving me from these chickens. And he said, they're advertising for a new radio station in Cambridge. You ought to go. So I applied. And at the interview, they said, "So where would you put satellite? We have the main station in Cambridge. Where would you put the other stations?" And I said, St Neots, was that in Bedfordshire? Newmarket, oh no, that's in Suffolk. Huntingdon, I suppose, St Ives, Royston, oh no, it's in Hertfordshire. And they said, Peterborough? So, oh yeah, that's in Cambridgeshire, isn't it? Didn't know, biggest town in Cambridgeshire. Anyway, I thought I'd done, all right in the interview. Rang them up 2 weeks later to say, when do I start? And they say, you don't. You don't. So I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear there to be a radio station in Cambridge I wasn't working on. While I was with the band, we'd done quite a lot of radio and quite a lot of television, and I was happy in a radio studio, so I kept going back. And they said, well, we haven't appointed freelancers yet, but I thought, well, whatever one of those is, I'll be one of those. And I got a couple of programs when it started. And fortunately, the station was appalling when it started. It was hopeless. And so people kept falling away, and they kept saying, Nick, can you do this afternoon's show? Nick, can you do tomorrow morning? Can you do? Yeah, I can do that, absolutely. No one was listening, and I was rubbish too. So by the time the station got good, I'd sort of learned my craft. In the meantime, the end of every day, at the end of a hard day's broadcasting, we'd go to the pub. And the pub was the Crown. It was just in front of where the station was. And the station was in Heffer's Printing Works, the old Heffer's Printing Works. Oh. So that was our local. And it was an unremarkable pub back then, completely. But we'd go there and we'd sit at 6 o'clock. About half a dozen we would sit round, moaning about everybody else, saying, did you hear what he played this morning? Did you hear that interview? He doesn't know about that. He shouldn't be on there. I don't know why. His voice is rubbish and all this. But one thing you didn't do then, you never got up. You never left that bar. Because as soon as anybody leaves, everybody else goes, yeah, of course, he's no better. He's dreadful too. So never leave. And I'd make damn sure I was the last person to go for that and the fact I had nowhere else to go. 10 years later, 10 years of Radio Cambridgeshire and the Crown being a sort of handy local, and I went to work for the grown-ups. I went to do programs for Radio 2 and Radio 4. I had a weekly show on Radio 2, and I made documentaries all around the world and had a wonderful time. But I never left Cambridge because it's silly. You know, why? Why do I leave Cambridge? Get on the train. I was commuting a lot of the time. Then I formed my own company and operated from a shed down the bottom of my garden in Great Wilbraham. And I remember I'd meet people occasionally in the Crown, which had changed its name to the Flying Pig. And I remember thinking, what have they done that for? Why did they change the name of this pub for? I didn't really mean a lot. Didn't really understand why that happened. But occasionally went in for a pint. Then I retired from that, from the radio, and started playing more, which was great. Got a band together, a good Mill Road band, with Ted, who lives in Great Eastern Street, and moans about the train wash all the time, and Bob, who lives in Romsey Terrace, and complains about, well, everything else. And Ted said to me one day, we should go and play at the Flying Pig. I met the woman who runs it. She's got children at the same school. She'd like us to go and do a gig there. And I thought, where are you going to play in there? It's too small. That's not going to work. So, you know, it was only around the corner. Now moved back into Cambridge. Well, all right, we'll go and do it. So I went and setting up. There are a few people in there, nice enough. In the corner, I thought, not quite sure why we're doing this. By 8 o'clock, the place was packed. And it was packed with people who had come to hear the music. Didn't necessarily know who we were, but they'd come to hear the band. What's more, the landlady herself just turned her back on the bar. She had people behind the bar working. She was out listening to the band as well. That's what she wanted. Justine Hatfield, her name was, and still is. And Justine told me many times, I do prefer the nights when not too many people come in so I can concentrate on the music. Music comes first, profit second. I was quite impressed by that. And then I heard the story about what they're going to do with it. Now, this pub is, in case you haven't been into the Flying Pig, it's a proper pub. It's an unpretentious Cambridge pub for Cambridge people, a cross-section of Cambridge people. There are locals. There are old-timers from the almshouses who drink there. There are old, aged punks, academics, artists, builders from the building sites, people on their way to and from the station. And it's always busy, the pandemic notwithstanding. It's all Sunday nights and Monday nights is busy. There are always people in there. It's a comfortable, sensible, as I say, unpretentious pub. And then I heard the story. The developers got it. The developers own it. They own the plot from the curved building, Botanic House, which actually I don't mind too much. I think it's bold. I don't mind it. When they moved the War Memorial, that worried me a lot. I didn't like the sound of that because my parents had always told me we were very much about the war. My family, my granddad was in the trenches. He was decorating the trench. Dad was in the POW camps in the Second World War. My brother and I assumed when we got to 19, we also would have to go to war. We thought that's what you did. So war was a thing. So the War Memorial was important because my parents said, I don't know if this is true or not, but they always said, that soldier who's marching is looking down Station Road to see if his comrades are returning from the station, which I'd always found really quite moving. So I was concerned that when they moved that War Memorial, it was going to be not looking down Station Road. But where they've moved it, it's fine for me. It's quite it's good. So don't mind that. But anyway, they own the bit from the curved building all the way down past the Flying Pig to that strange two-story brown office block that Mills and Reeve used to be in. All that, and then all the way back to the Botanic Gardens. It's a huge plot. It's massive. They said themselves the Flying Pig actually is 1% of the plot, which begs the question, if it's only 1%, could you leave it alone, do you think? Apparently not. It's Pace Developments of the company. And if I wrote a story about a developer, a ruthless developer, and I said that the CEO was named Johnny Vincent, any editor worth his salt would say, no, you can't call him Johnny Vincent, that's ridiculous. But he is, he's called Johnny Vincent, which I think is hysterical. This is where I start to get sort of a bit disorganized in my thoughts because there's so much to throw at this. They want to build very big monolithic blocks, many stories high, that will tower over the Botanic Gardens at the back and the Hills Road at the front. And they wanted to knock down the Flying Pig. Well, 13,000 signatures later on a petition, and the council's head were turned. And so they're now saying, okay, we won't knock it down. No, in fact, they put a press release out saying, we've saved the pig. It's not going to be knocked down. Aren't we marvelous? Then they said, but we are actually going to reconfigure the building completely so that you can't have music because it's unviable. You can't get enough tables in there anymore. It just won't work. I won't go into the technicality because it's boring. Unless you want to make a living there, it's boring. So they want to reconfigure it. It works perfectly all right as it is. But they say, no, we've got to close it for 2 years and reconfigure it. Now, there are developments that the university carry out in the city centre, all over the city centre. Big developments that far from restaurants, shops and pubs. And you put some hoardings up and they carry on their business. There's no need to close it. There's certainly no need to reconfigure it. They want to remove the garden, the beer garden, and have an amenity space to the side. Now, last year, during the lockdown, we couldn't have a band indoors. So they put on, while nobody's getting live music, while no musicians are playing anywhere at all, they put on 68 gigs last year in their garden. In the summer, it was so hot. But it's old Victorian walls around behind the band that make for wonderful acoustics. They put marquees up, plenty of benches, everybody socially distanced absolutely correctly. I played a lot, and I was so lucky to be able to do that. Sweltered in the summer. I played on Christmas Eve. It was so cold. And we'd go there with it raining, with it cold, with it really hot. And we'd be setting up at 7 o'clock and saying, no one's going to come. Who's going to come tonight? And they did. Every time the place was full. Now, Justine and her husband, Matt, started doing food, started doing all the things they had to do, did all the proper protocols for to deal with the pandemic, everything they should. They lost money every night they had a band on there. They lost money. It wasn't working. It wasn't working financially, but they so wanted to do it because they loved the music so much. They made it happen. It was absolutely amazing. It really, and it was so moving when the audiences turned up. They sat there absolutely freezing while we played, absolutely freezing. So I'm just about out of it, out of time with this. But Johnny Vincent claims that the development he sees as his legacy, desperate to contribute to the people of Cambridge. Given the fact that he lives in a big house in Surrey, I'm not quite sure why he has that commitment to the people of Cambridge. Don't quite see how that works. And as a teenager, too young to know what was going on, I witnessed the destruction of the Lion Hotel in Petty Cury, where we used to run the Cambridge Folk Club. I can still smell the stale cigarette smoke and sticky carpets of the Lion Hotel. In 1980, I directed the kite shows, Clive James and Terry Jones and Michael Palin and others in the Guildhall to raise money to fight the council to stop them from building the hideous Grafton Centre. I've seen buildings demolished and then replaced by monstrosities that then got demolished. Buildings that have been there for 200 years, knock them down, build something horrible and think, no, actually, that's not very nice either, and knock that down. I've seen that happen. I just wish now they'd just leave the Flying Pig alone. You know, it's old, it works, it's popular, and Nick Barraclough's great-great-grandparents used to run it. So, I'm going to leave you with a song, but before that, if you've got any questions, I'd be glad to field them as best I can.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was wonderful.
No, thank you, Nick.
Sorry. I loved learning about Robert Kett. Many people might well have read Samson's book Tombland about Robert Kett and memorialized on the side of that building. That was fascinating. Also the way station and all those historical details. And you've reminded us just how vigilant we have to be of our environment. I know there's somebody in the audience who's fighting for St Matthew's Pieces to not be overwhelmed. We lost Wilton Terrace, we lost Petty Cury. Thank you for bringing that back to our attention to join your resistance to preserve the Flying Pig. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Nick, what happened to the guy in the river? Had he just fallen in the river? Or was he a victim of crime or what?
They didn't say. We tried to find out, but their reportage ran out. That Robert Doom is all we know about him. That was his name.
We've got a question in from Facebook saying, how can we help to save the pig? Anything anyone can do?
Yeah. They're in a bind at the moment because unbelievably, and they're not alone in this, in pubs in the town, the Pace Investments, the people who own, the developers who own it, are exacting full rent, even when they're shut. They're having to pay full rent. So now they are threatened by being able to keep going. And if you go to crowdfunder.co.uk and search for Flying Pig, there's a crowdfunding situation going on to raise money just to keep them going. And it really is that. It would be just so awful if after all this, it should all go wrong because they run out of money. It would be criminal. And the government's helped a bit, I know, which is something. But yes, crowdfunder.co.uk and search for the Flying Pig.
Sounds like a conspiracy.
A lot of that going on at the moment.
Serious. It sounds like Pays are conspiring against the pub.
Well, I don't know. You can't. I mean, you know, you've got to be grown up about it and say, yeah, they're an investment company. They've got investors. They want to maximise the profit for their investors. But it's this specious arguments of, oh, we just want to do what's best for the city. Oh, we're just trying to. No, you're not. Be honest with us. Admit it. You just want to make a lot of money and get away with as much as you can. You know that. We know that you know that. Just admit it. And the wonderful thing is that people have fought them all the way. It's well done for putting up that thing. People have fought them all the way, and they are not compromising. And that's just the way it should be. I think that, I mean, they really thought they were going to knock it down. They were going to get to knock it down, these developers. They're not going to be able to do that. But it's almost as though, and I personally think this could well be the case. I've got no evidence whatsoever to back this up. But when did that ever stop anybody making assertions these days? No, but I just think the guy can't bear losing. I think that's what it's about. Because if he's going to keep it there, why don't you leave it alone? No, we've got to. No, you haven't at all. It's bewildering, and it's bullying. And I think people in Cambridge who just want to hang on to some of the things that we love, you know, like that. There seems so much of it get torn away. That can't you just leave that alone? No one's going to die if you don't. You're still going to make plenty of money, you know, because of all those people thirsting after more office blocks. You know.
Nick, could I ask you a question? Or a couple of comments, actually? Ratty and Kett, I remember that lovely building on the side of the corner. Ratty's buried in Mill Road Cemetery.
Yes.
Have you seen the grave? It's quite impressive.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? The most amazing Gothic construction. It's on the side of, I would still call it the Tech. It's on the side of the colleges, isn't it?
That's right, against the wall where Anglia Ruskin finishes.
Yes.
Yeah. What else was I going to say? I didn't know about the oak on the badge of Kett House. I lived opposite that because I was an apprentice at Heffer's, a bookbinding apprentice.
Oh.
And when I first married, I lived in a flat in one of their houses on the frontage.
Yes.
And we overlooked Kett House. We used to get woken up every Remembrance Sunday by the band playing The Last Post. Yes. We'd open the curtains and there they all were. But anyway, that's very interesting. Yeah,
it's some people who ran the pub in I can't remember what decade it was, in the 70s, I think, talked about when you went into the front door of the Flying Pig, the Crown as it was, there was a division, and the left-hand side was the public bar, the right was the snug.
Yeah. And
when in your time, when Heffer's Printing Works were there, Mr. Heffer would drink in the snug, along with Mr. Beezer from Beezer's Antiques on Regent Street.
Oh, it's probably
the shop is still there, now run by Martin Beezer, whom I was at school with. And he told me that, he said, my mother used to say, oh, father's in the Crown again. I know he is. He's going to be late for his tea.
Lots of or I won't say lots, but a number of the printers were working shift work 2 till 10, 6 till 2, 2 to 10, and the late shift people were often in the Crown having a drink during their break. You know, I think the guy who ran it was a Brummie, because
should have talked. Sounds like we should have talked to you for the book. Really?
Yeah.
There's so much, and there's so much the talk about the pub when the bus company, Eastern Counties Bus Company,
yeah,
was where those brown offices are now.
Yeah.
The bus station was there, and when we go into Cambridge from where we lived in Marshall Road and then Blincoe Grove, get the 106 bus through the middle of town, and you prayed as you went past there, it wouldn't stop, because occasionally it would stop right outside the bus station, and you'd sit there while the bus conductor and the driver got out, walked across the road, and had a fag or a cup of tea or something, or crew change.
Yeah.
And I remember one of them telling us, oh yeah, I used to drink in the Crown, yes. We'd always go there for a pint before we went off to drive the buses. So they're all pissed.
As you know, I was taught by your father at Brummie.
I'm talking to now. Yes, I can't see your face. Robin. Yes, hello, Robin.
And I remember your father would go to my dad's carpentry workshop in Sturton Street. And I remember you and your brother going there with them. And my dad always was quite chuffed to see your dad, because he told me your father escaped from a plane on fire. Yes. Now, was there a club you belonged to if you escaped an aircraft on fire?
It was the Caterpillar Club,
and
yeah. It was awarded to or you joined if you were an airman whose life was saved by a parachute. The caterpillar being the creative silk, which parachutes were made from. And there's a little gold caterpillar. I think my mother still had. Well, she got one.
Yeah.
And my father's was left to my sister, I believe. So yes, the Caterpillar Club, well remembered.
Yeah, it's coming back to me now.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's very interesting. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, the other side of Mill Road Bridge, my mum always called it Red Russia.
Yeah, yeah. Red Romsey was what my parents called it. Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Because, still is.
It was where the first Labour Party in Cambridge was formed.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Conservative type college servants would always call it Red Romsey or Red Russia.
That's it.
Thank you. That was great.
Well, thank you very much indeed for asking me. And because it's what I do, I shall have to leave you with a song.
Nick, before you go, before you sing, you mentioned something about a milestone or some marker in Station Road.
It's on Hills Road.
What's it? Where? Oh,
it's nestled in. It's behind the. I need to get this right. I think it's against the railings that go around the back of the War Memorial, where they come back and join the pavement. I think it's there. The equivalent on Trumpington Street is where you cross over from Brooklands Avenue.
Yes, I know that one. Yeah.
It's equivalent to that, but it's on that. I think it's where the railings meet the pavement, come back and meet the pavement.
And I think it's very true what you were saying about knocking down beautiful buildings, building another one, and then knocking them down. They're doing that at the moment in Station Road. I don't know whether you've noticed.
Yes.
They're knocking down one of those hideous office blocks, presumably to build another hideous office block.
There was the Station Hotel, which was, if you came out of the railway station, across you, just on the left corner was the Station Hotel.
I remember, yeah.
And they knocked that down to build. I remember it because I had this girlfriend with very posh parents who came off the train to meet me for the first time. I was 19 or something. They were terribly posh. And they must have a drink. We've got to have a drink. Take us to the... We went in there, into the bar. And she said, I said, what would you like? Feeling very grown up, asking people what they wanted to drink, because we just drank shandy. what would you like? She said, I have a pink gin. And he said, oh, whiskey and soda. And the barman gave a pink gin for her, put a glass of whiskey on the bar. I remember that every time I walked past that corner, I think of this. Put a glass of whiskey on the bar and then gave me the soda siphon. Now, for young viewers, you didn't get a soda in a can. You got a tall jar like that with a lever on the top that squirt like a fire extinguisher, really. I'd never used one before. So sure enough, I held the glass there and I went straight in and straight out again. Every time I walk, I'm still, 50 years later, that haunts me. But no, they knocked that pub down, built a horrible little office thing there, then they knocked that down. It's appalling. It's just stupid, short-sighted.
By the way, how is the best way to go about getting hold of your book?
Oh, email me.
Yeah, okay.
Because we've got one box of them left.
Okay.
So if you email Nick Barraclough at Hotmail.
I've got your email address.
You've got it, yeah.
Yeah.
Or if anybody wants to email me, it's nickbarraclough@hotmail.com. And that would be great. As I say, it goes to cancer research.
Thank you.
So, with the aid of this guitar, which I bought from an old friend of mine who used to play it at the Lion Hotel, the folk club at Lion Hotel in Petty Curie.
The Eric Granger's?
Eric Granger's. I bought it from Eric because the poor old boy can't play now. So this is a song that I wrote because I never wrote songs, but I thought if I can, I write scripts and try to write books and things, and I can sing and play the guitar, so put the two together during this lockdown thing and write a song, for goodness sake. So this is one I wrote along the lines of, because he's stuck for ideas, for topics. There are a lot of songs written by people saying, I love you so much that even though you're leaving me and going off with somebody else,
I will just
all I care is that you'll be happy. Now, we all know that's nonsense, because when someone does that, all you want is for them not to be happy. So I wrote the song as an antidote to those silly songs. If I had anything about me, I'd wish you well today. If I were halfway decent, I'd speed you on your way. If I had any honor, I'd hope that you would find a life of joy and happiness, two blissful souls entwined. If I were a bigger man, I would play the part of one with generosity that hides a broken heart. If I were a good man, I would wish you joy. I'd send a bunch of flowers to share with Wonder Boy. But what I hope is, sweetheart, and it's why I wrote this song, what I really hope is, honey, it all goes badly wrong. I hope he puts on weight and his business goes to hell. You really didn't think, did you, that I would wish you well? The fatuous romantic sang that his love was so true, it somehow could withstand the pain when she found someone new. As long as she was happy, he'd gladly set her free. Well, let me tell you, sugar lips, it's not the same with me. 'Cause what I hope is, sweetheart, and it's why I wrote this song. What I really hope is, honey, it all goes badly wrong. I hope he takes up golf and reads the Daily Mail. You really didn't think, did you, that I would wish you well? Oh no. Thank you all very much.